He was implicated in a cocaine operation by a witness who was later murdered up in Westchester County a while back. The hitter on that job was one Marco Baselli, Sal Baselli's kid. A first grader could connect these dots.
This season, law enforcement have been on the hunt. They made no secret that they were looking at the major crime families in New York. But even though they've been tailing Rock for the best part of half a season, boying a couple for questioning, maybe having some work undercover, they still haven't caught their major break in their investigation. They were going round in circles because Rock and Howard blamed everything on Crown Camacho, and since then, Howard has been trying to keep them off track. But are the tables about to turn after Marvin's face ended up on Agent Tanner's desk in episode 6? In the mid-season break, I broke down some death predictions which I also tied in with some predictions for who could go to jail, and I had 3 at the top of my list: Detective Howard, Famous, and Marvin himself. So in this video, we're going to be breaking down the investigation by conducting our own, before we get to the thoughts and theories for whether Marvin or any of the characters could end up in an orange jumpsuit by the end of Raising Kanan Season 3. Now let's just take it back to Season 1 to paint the full picture of this investigation. The Thomas family was supplying a club named Lane's. Lane's is owned by someone called Hugo, although we were never able to put a face to the name. In charge of the day-to-day running of the operation was Tony Deep, who made a deal to continue sourcing product from the Thomases. But something you don't do is disrespect Rock, and she was soon given a lesson when Scrappy burned her dog. Now when Marvin came to Lane's, he bought her a new dog to replace Bella. He also stood up for her when a few guys were giving her some trouble outside Lane's. She then took a liking to a new knight in shining armor, and they ended up sleeping together a few times, but they were never an item. Later in Season 1, Tony was caught selling product at Lane's, and she was in some deep shit. So she was ready to give up her supplier, who was of course, Marvin and the Thomas family.
He sells drugs. Okay, I promise you, him and his entire family are dealers in Queen.
Now Marvin was way too smart for Tony. He knew not to do or say anything stupid, because he clocked the undercover agents at Lane's, but he was later picked up for possession and intent to distribute, and taken to the precinct where he did see Tony.
That's who you got? Tony, your big CI?
Fast forward to Season 3, Marvin actually caught a lucky break with his case, because Tony was nowhere to be found, and no witness means no case. Although he still had to go to anger management classes where he met Gerald, and I will be coming back to Gerald Mo later on in this investigation. Now later the Thomas family's lawyer managed to track down Tony, who is now living out in Westchester, also engaged to a dentist. So Marvin went to track her down to tie up some loose ends. He found her in Scarsdale and followed her all the way back home, and so now he knew where she lived, but he was careful not to carry out the hit himself. He actually palmed this job off on Marco Baselli, the son of Sal Baselli from the Italian mafia. But this hit couldn't have gone any more wrong. Tony was dealt with and the dentist survived, but caught in the crossfire was Marco, and this landed Marvin and the Thomas family in a whole lot of shit with the Italian mafia. But the consequences didn't end there, and we are going to come back around to Tony Deep later on. But following Marco's death, this war with the Italian mafia meant a hell of a lot more bodies dropped on the streets of Queens, with all 3 of the siblings just making it out alive in Season 2. However, because of the chaos, the feds were about to roll into the precinct. Now, law enforcement's presence has been heavy at the beginning of Season 3, because of the bloodbath between the Italians and Rock, and this is where Howard comes into it. Rock found herself in hospital being questioned by law enforcement, and the same goes for Lou over at Bulletproof Records, but they stuck to the same story. The Baisley Park and the South Jamaica houses was an operation that was run by Crown Camacho, and Howard decided to back that theory more than once. He said that Crown was a smart kid, always seen around the projects, and with music being the new crack, all these drug dealers were known to open record labels and go into music to clean their cash. Unfortunately for Howard, Agent Tanner wasn't buying Crown Camacho's story. He wanted to dig deeper, and he was also keeping his cards really close to his chest. He only brought in Howard when he needed a bit of information, but then keeping him in the dark when it came to who his targets were. So Howard knew that he had to get in on the inside somehow. Meanwhile, Rock was being watched closely by undercover agents, and the same could also be said about Marvin, where he was very careful by not telling Tony he was a drug dealer. We do have to mention, he did the complete opposite with these Wall Street guys, although we still don't know whether they could be undercover, so that's just one we do need to keep in mind still. Now fast forward to him reuniting with Gerald Mo. Was this 911 a coincidence? I don't think it was. Marvin met Gerald Mo at his anger management lessons in Season 2 following the Tony Deep case, and in Season 3, we have seen them become good friends. Marvin's been there for him, they've been talking about their daughters and issues, but what are his real intentions and motives? Does he really work as a journalist for The Voice, or could he actually be undercover?
You knew him?
Yeah, but I didn't know then.
Did he sell drugs like the police were saying? Because they're always quick to paint folks with that brush.
Now I did question at the time in my breakdown for episode 5, I don't think it was such a coincidence that Gerald Mo brought up Uzamuddin Tippett, but also the way he was questioning Marvin. Either it was just his journalistic nature coming into play, or maybe he really is undercover and he's been playing Marvin. Now if that is the case, then he would have been strategically placed in Marvin's anger management class all the way back in season 2, so he would have been in the works for a long time. Now this brings me over to the events of episode 6, and how Marvin's picture could have ended up on Agent Tanner's desk.
Tony Deep. Sounds like a porn star.
Oh, she sound like to me is somebody I don't even fucking know.
While Marvin and Gerald were on the park bench, talking about their daughters and how Gerald could write a story about Duke in his entertainment section, they were interrupted by someone who used to work at Lane's. He said that he walked in on Marvin and Tony 1,000 times, and I don't doubt that he did. But Marvin made it sound as if he didn't know him or what he was talking about, because not only was Gerald listening behind him, but also because Tony is now dead because of the hit that he put out, which let's not forget, also resulted in the death of one Marco Baselli. So is it such a coincidence that Marvin's face now ended up on Agent Tanner's desk so soon after Gerald heard Tony's name being mentioned at the park bench? You guys know I don't believe in such coincidences. Now Tanner said that Marvin was implicated in a cocaine operation by a witness who was later murdered, Tony Deep. But she wasn't just murdered by anyone, it was Marco Baselli like we've just been through, and it doesn't take a genius to connect the dots. So look, let's not get it twisted, Marvin is in some big trouble. And does that mean that Gerald is a snitch? Maybe. I do think he could be, but there are a few other angles we do need to consider.
Just got some mopping up to do, that's all. Okay, then you guys.
Fish got ears.
Stefano mentioned that his place of business might have been bugged, because he'd had police listening to a bunch of his places. That's why he was always taking Unique, Rock, or whoever else out the back to discuss their business. And let's not forget that he and a bunch of Italian friends were brought in for questioning. Now Stefano may have stood his ground and he may not be the snitch, but can we say the same about everybody else? For example, Giorgio. He's in a prime place to know the comings and goings of some major players in New York, as well as overhearing some bits of conversation being at the front of Stefano's exotic fish store. So he would have overheard a lot of shit when it comes to Stefano's business, including him calling Marvin the mailman. So while we're on that point, I'm not sure whether the writers did this on purpose, but just when Marvin was about to pull the trigger on Sal at the end of 302, they were in the middle of taking a family photo, so who's to say that they didn't get Marvin on camera? So that's just a side thought, because the Italians might have a score to settle later on down the line if they aren't the ones who gave the info to Agent Tanner, that is. So the Italians are also one to consider. Now having said all of that, I do think everything points toward Gerald being undercover and him giving the info to Agent Tanner, because it is no coincidence that it happened so soon after what went down at the park bench. But now the question is, what is Howard gonna do about it? Because he's not exactly a saint either. Detective Howard is in some big trouble because he's stuck in between. He's got secrets that he's protecting, history and also murders, and there is a reason why he hasn't directly told Rock that he got rid of Beck. Information can be used as leverage if alliances ever do shift, but at this moment in time their interests do align. Now Agent Tanner uses Howard when he needs him, but he hasn't given him too much information. More recently he said that the information that they do have is for the task force and the task force only, which made Howard make his move to get closer by taking Ogden's role. So again, it does make you question, why is Agent Tanner now happy to give this information to Howard all of a sudden? Why the change of heart?
By the way, where are they with your shooting? Any progress?
It's kind of like Ogden was saying. More thoughts and theories.
I do think the writers are constantly reminding us Howard does find himself in the crosshairs, and if he isn't careful then he might find himself in an orange jumpsuit as well. Now we all know Howard will bring this information to Rock, and then they're gonna have to think of how do they make their next move. But something that could throw a spanner in the works for Howard is Scrappy's mom. Let's not forget, she will be coming to the precinct in episode 7 to tell Howard about who killed Scrappy, and with the feds working out of the precinct, Agent Tanner could very well see Scrappy's mom talking to Howard. So if she ends up dead so soon after, which I think is highly likely, it is going to look pretty bad on Howard's part. So Lou's confession could actually have a huge domino effect all the way to Howard at the precinct. And then there's also Agent Adina Foyle. Has she really stopped looking into Berg's murder, or could she resurface and be a problem later on? Whatever happens, Howard will have to do something to close this case off and send the feds packing. Now how he does that, I think we've already got a foreshadow. He's already made his first move by trying to take Ogden's role, but he does need to do a hell of a lot more. Although I do think one of the three is still going down, and so that brings me on to Famous. With the theme of this video focusing on law enforcement overall, we do have to talk about Famous rhyming about his crimes with 411. No doubt this is going to end in one or two ways for Famous. In my opinion, it's just a question of who gets there first. Does Ronnie get rid of him or tell Kanan to take out his own brother, just like he did with Unique? Or will law enforcement see 411 as a self-confession and bring him in for the murder of Freddy? I really do believe we can make a good case for both. So let's see what road they go down, along with Marvin and Howard. But one thing's for sure, law enforcement are definitely getting closer. Whether it's Famous, Marvin, or Detective Howard, I do think they're going to get one of them. But that's a breakdown of what law enforcement have on Marvin, the investigation, and a few theories on how this could play out with Marvin, Detective Howard, and Famous, and why all three still remain on my personal investigation board. But drop all your comments and predictions down below in the comment section, and let me know how you see this playing out, especially with Marvin. And will Agent Hannah get that win? Drop all your comments down below in the comment section, and as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.